Certainly. Here's a long and detailed story that explores how different ancient governments might have handled and interacted with criminals and sinners, weaving in elements of justice, redemption, punishment, and societal values. This story will take you through the traditions, values, and philosophies of various civilizations. The tale of justice and mercy, the way of the ancient courts. In the ancient city of Aranios, nestled within the desert sands and surrounded by high stone walls, justice was not a simple matter. The council chambers, known as the Hall of Scales, housed the city's most esteemed judges, who came from a range of backgrounds: learned philosophers, hardened warriors, wise elders, and spiritual leaders. Their task was not merely to punish wrongdoers, but to restore balance to society and help even the most guilty find a place within the moral order of their time. Criminals and sinners in Aranios were seen as complex people, not wholly condemned by a single action. This belief echoed in the city's motto, inscribed above the entrance to the Hall of Scales. Justice is light, light is clarity. Here, every crime was judged on its own merit, and every sinner was examined beyond their transgressions. Act 1. The theft of sacred water. The summer was dry and water was scarce. The city's reserves were kept in the sacred cisterns, guarded day and night by the king's men. One day, it was discovered that someone had broken in and stolen water from the cisterns. This was a serious crime. In the desert, water was life itself. The council gathered, and soon a suspect was apprehended. His name was Tiras, a poor farmer who had seen his crops wither and his family struggle to survive. Tiras pleaded guilty, explaining his desperate circumstances. The punishment for theft of water was severe, as it endangered the entire community. Some council members argued for his execution, saying that only such a punishment could deter future thieves. Others advocated mercy, seeing in Tiras not a villain, but a father pushed to the edge. The council decided to let the eldest judge, an 80-year-old philosopher named Talos, decide. Talos looked at Tiras and said, "You have stolen what is most precious to us all. But tell me, if you had water, would you have stolen from the cistern?" Tiras shook his head. "No, great sage, I would not." "Then you shall serve," Talos decreed, "but not in chains. You will dig a new well under the guidance of the city's masons, that future generations may benefit from what you have taken." And so Tiras labored to dig the well, watched over not by guards, but by the masons, who taught him the art of their trade. The well he dug eventually supplied enough water for his entire neighborhood, and from that day on, Tiras was not seen as a thief, but a provider. This way, he repaid his debt to society in a way that made him whole again. Act 2. The Sin of Sacrilege. Years passed, and Aranios thrived, though it faced many challenges. In a nearby temple, a priest named Zarin was caught in an act of sacrilege. He had taken treasures from the temple, selling them in secret to fund a lifestyle of indulgence. When he was discovered, the people were outraged. Priests were meant to be pillars of morality, symbols of purity. The council gathered once more. Some demanded Zarin be exiled, stripped of his priestly robes, and cast out as an example. Others feared that exile would only send a corrupt man to influence another place. Talos, now frail but still sharp of mind, rose once again to speak. "If we cast Zarin out, he will spread his corruption elsewhere, and if we imprison him, he will rot but not reform. What is our true purpose? Justice or vengeance?" The council deliberated, then reached a compromise. Zarin was to spend his days working for the poorest temple, cleaning and maintaining it under the watch of another priest. He was stripped of his rank and no longer allowed to conduct rituals. However, he was allowed to remain within the city to observe, serve, and reflect upon his deeds. As months turned to years, Zarin's pride was stripped away by the humility of his new role. The people, at first hostile, eventually accepted him as someone who had found redemption through service. Act 3. The Murderer and the Healer. Finally, Aranios was tested as it never had been before. A murder took place. One brother had killed another in a drunken rage. It was an offense that struck at the very heart of family and community bonds. The murderer, a man named Jalil, was quickly captured and brought before the council. His crime was undeniable, and most of the council agreed on one thing: he should be put to death. But the victim's widow came forward, bringing with her the youngest member of the family, a little girl who had witnessed her father's death. "We have lost a father," she pleaded. "But must my daughter also lose her uncle?" Talos listened closely, his eyes wet with sorrow. "Death may answer one life with another, but it will never bring life back," he said softly. "Yet murder must be answered. Life cannot continue unchanged." Jalil was sentenced not to die, but to serve the family he had wronged. He was forbidden from holding property of his own, instead living under the guardianship of his brother's widow, laboring to provide for the child as if she were his own. As Jalil worked to support his family, his guilt weighed heavily upon him. He lived without comfort, reminded daily of the harm he had caused. Yet over time, he found purpose in his service. The little girl grew up knowing her uncle not as a killer, but as a man who, though he had committed a grave sin, had given his life in atonement. Act 4. The Legacy of the Hall of Scales. These stories and others like them were passed down as the legacy of Aranios' Hall of Scales. In Aranios, criminals and sinners were seen as people who had lost their way but not their worth. The punishments in the Hall of Scales often involved reparations or community service, ways for the guilty to give back to society what they had taken from it. The concept of justice was not merely retributive, but restorative, aimed at healing the wounds inflicted on both the wronged and the wrongdoer. Aranios became known far and wide for its unique approach to justice. Other cities sent emissaries to study their ways, and people who had lost hope found refuge within its walls, inspired by the city's commitment to second chances. As the years passed, Talos's philosophy lived on. His teachings spread, and soon other lands began to adopt the ways of restorative justice, aiming not just to punish but to understand, to heal, and to create a more balanced society. The words of the Hall of Scales rang true long after his death. "Justice is light, light is clarity." And so, in the ancient city of Aranios, criminals were not just criminals, and sinners were not just sinners. They were people, flawed as all people are, but capable of redemption. As the years passed, Talos's philosophy lived on, his teachings spread, and soon other lands began to adopt the ways of restorative justice, aiming not just to punish, but to understand, to heal, and to create a more balanced society. The words of the Hall of Scales rang true long after his death. Justice is light, light is clarity. However, the true measure of a society lies not just in its laws, but in the hearts of its people. In Aranios, children learned from an early age the values of empathy, forgiveness, and accountability. They were taught that everyone could stumble, but what mattered most was the effort to rise again. Community gatherings became opportunities for reflection, where stories of redemption were shared, inspiring hope and compassion among the people. Those who had once walked the path of crime became mentors for the youth, teaching them the importance of making choices that uplift rather than destroy. The bonds forged in this tapestry of justice transcended mere punishment. They wove a fabric of community resilience. Over time, the people of Aranios began to see criminals not as pariahs, but as part of a shared human experience. The sins of the past were transformed into lessons for the future, fostering a deep sense of belonging and purpose among all citizens. In the end, Aranio stood as a beacon of hope in a world often plagued by darkness. Its legacy was a testament to the belief that through understanding and compassion, even the deepest wounds could be healed. The Hall of Scales not only measured justice, but celebrated